Hello. Hi, everybody. Knock, knock. Good evening, and welcome to the Readings in Contemporary Poetry at DHLC. The Readings in Contemporary Poetry series initially ran under the direction of Brigitte Mullins. You probably remember from 1987 all the way into 2003. And it became known around town for featuring celebrated poets, both innovative and experimental and academic, and it involved doing retrospectives of their work. The series today is very fortunate, we're very fortunate at DIA to have restarted the series last year with Vincent Katz, who's a friend and has become the caretaker and co-curator of these readings. So I'm grateful. I'm DIA's curator and I collaborate with Vincent. He's been trying to help me catch up and learn new things and learn about poetry. And it's been really a fantastic experiment for us. We, in a way, have begun a practice of divination or magic operation, I call it, because what we try to do is we try to pair two poets, two voices, oftentimes from two different generations, and to see if that provocation can allow us a platform to think about their work, whether it's work that has been finished or that is in progress. And it's been thrilling to bring back the series in this manner. The Readings in Contemporary Poetry series supported in part by public funds of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and I would like to also extend a warm thank you to Amalia Dayan and Adam Liedemann, Barbara and Charlie Wright, and an anonymous donor who, for their generosity, because their support makes this program happen. I also would like to thank Brooklyn Brewery for their complimentary beers. And I'd finally like to thank the poets tonight, Tony and Jennifer, for their kind acceptance of this invitation. And my colleagues in Adia, John Sprague, Patrick Hellman, Rebecca Rice, Carrie David, Sarah Kovac for their help. Before I introduce Vincent, let's leave it to Vincent to introduce the poets. I want to point out to please take one of these when you leave. It lists all our programs at DIA, our exhibitions at different sites, and at DIA Beacon, and the next series of poetry readings. Thank you very much for coming.
Yes, thank you all for coming. We're really excited about tonight's reading, and it's the first one of 2012, and we hope you'll come back to the others. We have some great ones lined up. We have Ann Waldman and Leanne Brown. Leanne is here tonight, and Bob Holman and Tom Fink, and a number of others. So just go to the website or pick up a brochure, and you'll find out about them. So we will... Tonight's reading, we will have Jennifer Moxley first, then a short break, after which Tony Towle will read. Jennifer Moxley was born in San Diego, California in 1964. She studied at Mesa College, UCSD, the University of Rhode Island, where she got her BA, and Brown University, where she received an MFA in 1994. She is the author of, among other books, Imagination Verses, The Sense Record, The Line, and Clampdown, published by Flood Editions in 2009. She has translated 2 books by the French poet Jacqueline Risset, and she is the author of The Middle Room, a 600-plus page memoir published by Sub Press in 2007. She lives in Orono, Maine, where she is a professor of English at the University of Maine. Jennifer Moxley's poetry has gone through several phases, but all of it is characterized by a muscular line, surprising word choices, and a fearlessness regarding writing and subject that gets transferred to the reader or listener as a sense of giddy apprehension. Endlessly ranging through forms, her books show her restlessness, coupled with a strong ambition, a sense of community, and a post-romantic commitment to the life of the sentiments. Her strength as a poet is in her ever-renewed confrontation of reality, which often manifests itself in the dreary side of human and social interactions. But she is equally adept at seeing the humor in depressing situations, a kind of survival guide poetics. That Moxley is able to write about such intense feelings without irony, while simultaneously maintaining a dedication to verbal and syntactic experimentation, is a substantial achievement. While she does avail herself of ironic undercutting, her main tone is of the urbane sublime. The rhythms of English poetry, from Wyatt to Keats, structure her syntax, which she subverts with an American language thoroughly of her time and place. In Though Crowded from Imagination Verses, she writes, "I'm not thinking of you always. In separation, our time is queer requirement, the impossible revelation of a moment alone, or the pale counting of debts." Here, as throughout her poetry, her erudition is conversational, her command of double and triple meanings surprising and revealing. In later poems, such as In Creeley's Wake and Our Defiant Motives, Moxley shows a resolve to move away from defeat as the motivating factor, while still recognizing its inevitability. She has created, through poetry, a way of living against defeat. Please welcome Jennifer Moxley to DIA.
I have my phone as a timepiece, not because I'm going to make a call in the middle of my reading. Thank you so much, Vincent, for that. It was a really beautiful introduction. It's a privilege to be here and to read with Tony and to see so many really great old friends from a really long time ago. It's very exciting. So thank you all for coming out, and thank you to Dia and to Vincent for inviting me to participate in this event. It's a great honor. So I'm going to start tonight. How's the sound? Okay? All right. I'm going to start tonight with a couple poems from my last published book, Clampdown, which came out in 2009, as Vincent said, from Flood Editions. I was going to say Flood Addictions. It sounded like I was going to say. The first poem I want to read is called The March Notebook, and it's for Robert Kelly, a poet who I admire greatly. And one of the reasons I want to read it is there was a celebration of Robert Kelly that took place in New York City last April, I believe it was, or May. It was May, I think. And I couldn't attend because I was at a different celebration for a different poet who I admire. So I really regretted not being able to participate in that. So I wanted to read this poem for Robert Kelly. It's called The March Notebook, and the title comes from when he came to University of Maine, where I work, to give a reading, and he had a notebook with him, a 3-ring binder. It was fairly thick, and it said March on the side. And I said to his wife, you know, what's that notebook? And he said, well, that's the poetry he's written in March. And it was like 300 pages. And I said, are you kidding? He said, well, you haven't seen the prose notebook. So I was quite horrified. The March Notebook for Robert Kelly. The intellect at work can alienate the world. Should, during the progression of your life, the fashions change, and the young, ever capricious, abandon you, it may be because they know better than to follow the compass of an unpopular idea, upon which the most rarefied needle risks leading them away from the source. Quenching water up ahead? Better to back the opportunist who justifies their confusion by demonizing the vulnerable messenger. Not often do we choose to risk the real unpleasantness of standing up for an ideal we cannot honestly vouch for. Certainty is a luxury of the fraudulent mind. New loves and places can make us feel foolish for following the logic of a fated moment, though we were right to do so. Watch the edgy message turn into the blathering of a paradigm, expired, bulldozed, and neatly paved. Look overhead. There's Adorno dangling from a window, enduring psychoanalysis from flippant passers-by. The restless trends of the politically motivated will have their rule, turning brief successes into lasting product, changing established systems without regret. What the new brand cannot understand effectively becomes unreadable, slightly feared, and somewhat baffling, even a charity case. Who attempts to have a view we eventually will undo? Suddenly, they will find themselves waking up on the wrong side of everything, their heroes being carted off to prison. And we feel good, don't we, when turning the lock of judgment on yet another broken life, exulting as we exit the dungeon, tossing the key into a field of unkempt, matted earth. This is the moment we have ceased to feel the breathing of others beneath our feet. The question must be stifled. How many lives do we cast aside because they ask too much of us? They threaten the simple pride we take in everything we write. They ask how we, with no knowledge of the past, can call for revolution. The here and now continues to play merciless tricks on our priorities. Great souls spill over, troubling lazy arrogance, thumbing their noses at inane rules. Play the game, we say. That or stay behind and amuse us with your farcical stabs at appeasing the winds. The next poem, the last poem I'd like to read from this collection is called Mother Night. And I wrote this poem in the Christmas of 2002, a few months before we bombed Iraq. And I wanted to read it partly because the soldiers are coming home. And where I live, a lot of them land for the first time in the United States. And so whenever you go to the airport, you see them having reunions with their families. And it's genuinely moving. And actually, I was standing to go to fly somewhere, and I had a soldier behind me. And I said, "Isn't it nice that you're coming home?" And he said, "Don't count on it." And he probably knows better than I do, right? But still, I can cling to my naive hope. Mother Night. Right before the darkness turned around and began to head in the other direction, I had a dream that you and I were decorating the Christmas tree, and I asked you as we hung the aging trinkets, the crippled pinecone elf, the dry construction paper Santa, the several odd souvenirs from cultures both Christian and unchristian, bought by my well-meaning parents in homage to that naive dream formerly known as the family of man. How much goodwill would it take on this cold midwinter's eve to renew the genuine warmth we used to feel towards one another? How many prayers of peace or mummers' carols? How many joyous songs or songs with solemn and saturnine themes? How many earnest petitions? After untangling the string of mini lights with uncustomary ease, we passed the neat lasso of green wire around the sticky sap and slightly prickly needles. With a confidence not unbecoming, you looked me in the eyes and said, "For you, I guarantee that by the end of the season, sympathy and tender care will outreach judgment and critique. 2 late-century soldiers will meet in the desert, lay down their arms and embrace. Martin Luther, out walking at midnight, will be awestruck by the elegant stars peeking luminous through the German trees. Holly and ivy will grow up through the snow, the burning bush, the drops of blood, and Father Christmas astride a goat, Chris Kindle, Christ child, abolitionist, a jovial elf, slender pipe in hand, will rouse the Union soldiers to their grim task again. And then, in homage to these and other half-reasoned out rituals, you and I will go hand in hand and hang a sprig of sage-colored mistletoe on the ark of the new bassinet. Delirious, I awoke from these words, got out of bed, and tiptoed to the living room to sneak a peek at the tree. There was thin silence and the smell of pine. In the uncanny snowlight, the enchantment of the expectant scene was no less powerful than when, as a child, I had been entranced by the magical appearance of the festive packages under the tree. Time of the wheel, Yuletide, the old solar tricks, and the hopes of what the new year might hold in store. Dreams fulfilled and heavenly peace, or, it struck me, as a tractor-trailer passed and shook the darkened house. Perhaps we're on the eve of some fortune less propitious. On this cheerless point of suspicion, the folk personages on the Christmas tree, with their frozen smiles and arthritic postures, seemed, as they bobbed their heads up and down, to agree with me. The other older poet who I admire greatly, who prevented me from going to Robert Kelly's celebration is Keith Waldrop, and I was at his retirement celebration. And this is a poem I wrote for Keith, and it's called Listen. Listen for Keith. Whenever I fear myself a bore, I think of listening. I tell myself, do it more. I know a man who can give more attention to his meal than a room, yet still listen. He looks suspiciously like Ruskin. He does not boast. Yet if he recollects an anecdote illustrative of human folly, a mischievous gleam inflects his milky blue eyes, trailed by a little grin. The failure of outlandish ploys especially delights him. He sometimes speaks about the Bible as though he knows its start to end. He does, though he is neither pious nor dour. When I sit in his proximity, I have a tendency to chatter. Am I nervous or trying to amuse? I am trying to set him off, in a friendly way, to elicit the licit state of listening. I speak the open sesame, the magic word that will joggle the charmed book from off the shelf of his memory. I will not have heard of it. My naivete, ever on offer, raises the eyebrow of my interlocutor. They are wiry and stiff. He has given me gifts that bid me listen. A ponderous box set of thickly cut 33 1/3-inch records. Bach's St. Matthew Passion. Books, countless books, all freakishly apt. Sometimes, when he's grumpy, I find I fear his judgment, though toward me he has only been well-mannered and kind. His conspicuous love of women makes him a very poor curmudgeon. He delights in odd stories, tales that teeter at the edge of incredible, but nevertheless are quite true. He likes to read bad meter and to share odd knowledge known by few. He has his share in Adam's curse, although he does not seem to. A gift for surface levity props up this masquerade. Without pretense or martyrdom, the pages blow by gently. Listen, and you might hear them chuckling. Now, that was obviously not a newer poem, and all the rest of the reading is some newer work, post-clampdown, over the last couple years. This is called Not That, Disappointment. I am inappropriate. I feel it in every said thing, in every enthusiasm, desire, wish, but mostly in every unsettling ambition. I live for the light in the dark of history, the ease of accomplishments after the fact. It will all seem inevitable after the fact. The irritable need to remove the disturbance of how I am failing in so many ways. And, having lost myself and their values, the distance between you and me is abolished. Might I speak to you in the quiet of your tower? 1571, the reader replaces the dead. 1919, the dead speak to the writer of ambitious verticality, a mind that prefers conversation with vanished spirits and the not yet living. When I think of it, I too would like to become a father late in life, to awaken to this sweetly sour dewiness of infancy dozing at the foot of my toasty bed. The room's vacancy, now filled with the emptiness of past bedrooms, would be filled with a child's potential. I would write poems to that potential. I would shut out the world and think only of it. It would be a literary desire, a dream not of structure, but of substance. We can play at structure, can play at it, build categories of welcome that yet remain empty, while substance becomes a book, a desk, a library, the leisure to imagine that in talking to God, the whole of history might listen in. There you are, against a beautiful backdrop, standing sober in velvet, holding a discarded book, aware of the cool air on your skin, oblivious to the forces that would block your journey if they knew the extent of your inappropriate ambition, Baldwin in the Harlem Stacks raging against his stepfather. A glorious resistance to a deadening system becomes you, down on your knees, resigned to embodying a shattered sequence of a broken soul in a broken tower, the dream of the child at the foot of the bed, asleep, that is, yourself. This next poem, I feel like I have a lot more poems for people than I sometimes do in this reading, is for Anne Lauterbach. And the title is There is a Bird Song at the Root of Poetry. And this is a line from Robert Junkin in a letter to Denise Levertov. And I was fascinated by this line because he puts the bird song in the root instead of the branch. And so I have this image of this bird stuck underground with its feathers up, like the beak in the ground, and so this muffled image. No, it's very violent and horrible, right? That's why we're laughing. No, but I just couldn't get that out of my mind. And then I'd have this conversation with Anne Lauterbach about certain persons in poetry who sort of bully other persons in poetry, and you know, if they don't have ideas that are ones that they appreciate. So those were sort of what was going on in my mind when I wrote this poem. There is a bird song at the root of poetry, hemmed in by an untenable image, feathers planted below fragile branches of avian feet, scaly crossroads scoring a particular blue of sky, offending through the uselessness of misplaced forms, thorny prongs that make no sense and yet belong on the ground out of which the bird wings stiffly jut, rigid as rhubarb leaf, rising from out the muffled beak, sight of a perverse smothering, throated core submerged. Should you kneel the body's aged mechanism beneath the shade of dry feathers, should you place the vulnerable cavern of ear, trembling passage to psyche's failures, our fall into suffering, knowledge, should you listen, you will hear the wasted strains of an underground song, deadened by thoughtless depths, but alive, for the dead have kept it safe from false music, a ghoulish guard of love, safe from she who, bullied by the cruelty of others, the false sophistication of fashionable libraries, the envy of those who would molest the world into false confessions and banish all mystery with their dripping candles, who would unearth the bird song to cage it, she who will end by destroying what she loves most. Shh, quiet. Listen, it is drawn by other amblers. It strains awake in our attentions as a sudden, bewildering happiness. Ear wedded to earth, listen and hear what those who know all cannot. This next poem is a little longer. It's in 3 parts, so I'm going to have to settle into it a little bit. It is called The Various Silences Lay in Shadow. The various silences lay in shadow. 1. Your lyre is muffled with silk, a column of darkness, a sheltered self, some kind of hell. It follows and dampens the hearkening. Who is singing in the distance? I can hear nothing from this shore. Your lateral movement ensnakes my insight. O tall tree, who is singing? Down to the ground, up to the heavens, where the long-armed archons strum rubbery harmonies over the slippery purple of your umbrella. Is this darkness or silence? I hear your feet above my head, impatient, besuited pacing as you head purposefully to Lloyd's of London, followed by skeletons of protected men. Dumb poet, who is singing? I can hear nothing anymore. Is it she? When weathers of the other world fill my ears, I hear her declaration, the feral grandmother, Medusa gray locks, lashed in windswept rain, as she flouts the two-straight path. Enfin, on respire. Vital spirits enter her body, and planets play through it. Then I remember how to breathe, so simple and so rhythmical. You collect umbrellas to protect against your wounded wife, tweedy baffles and ivory handles to deaden the ancient meter. O Orpheus, why did you leave her? Recover the influence, let it live. She is the elements, hear them singing. I can hear nothing from this shore. For in this version you were castrated by violent female passion. Take your watery journey, give back to she who sings and knows. Did you leave her in search of the solitary song? The structural song, no persons? If so, that explains the beauty we take in rehearsing the end of things. A city bestrewn with broken lyres, unmuffled and crumpled by bluster, 1,000 discordant notes, this in the storm on the way to the opera. But under the lights, according to Gluck, Eurydice gets to live. The perfect harmony of love replaces the broken order. Do not run for cover, for she is Orpheus. The hazy spheres spin her song as she sings our way toward oneness. Undefended, she will affect us. Let us hear her song. Diverse silences under shadow, umbrageous forests lit by music, to become a sudden kingdom of peace. All are welcome. No Zarathustrian solitude. No call to quiet meditation. Instead, the dance. Here is life and darkness too. The song calls all to find the center. The stars in candle-ravaged branches, the shabby pelts of starving creatures pattern into new-made forms. And so, through ritual, we remember the cool shelter of this cavern, a vision enlivened beneath the pleated scallop of my broken umbrella. The spirits of horses run beside me, yet I am alone. Must we be severed from our true loves to hear their buried voices again? Under the shelter of another's invention, elements shredded, arms bound. My lyre is muffled by silk. O Eurydice, do not stay ever dead, but sing a puncture through this protection. Remind us of our mistakes. Her harm is not our redemption. It wounds the gentle covenant, that somehow these signs will guide us back. A concordance of image spirits move the bowed contours of the stone, the Godhead's message without her, lament without softness or end. She is metaphor, because not mother, yet without her, no song, no horses running or fires that burn. She is the sign's completion. The singing stars have distanced themselves from our defeat. Courting the sun of this late millennium, Orpheus is defenseless. Let him be rejoined to see she who sings and knows. Or are we doomed to lay low, to muddle through the mire, mumbling songless speech in search of like shapes, to find our way by facts alone? What evidence do we need? Listen, someone is singing. A light hums against the deathless sky. Night songs echo through dry air. It has finally stopped raining. The singer's foot sinks into the sand. Orpheus toys with the threshold. Will he call her back with a song of regret? Or is another song in order? I am wrapped up against the weather, but feel the centuries beneath my skin. A horse is coming to meet me. He is unreined and calls my name. His mane is a fibrous lyre. My hands obediently strum. By a touch I am made. Boundless, boundless and undone. Must we be severed from ourselves to sing with the voices of others? Dismembered by discord, the the patterned static of 1,000 machines speeding through the darkness. Beneath the hum, the gentle strum of a tensed musical interview. Repeated ascending arpeggio. Can you hear it making its bid to bring the harmony back? The rhetoric drowns it. The credentials deaden it. The song will not stand before a board of experts. What do they know? Nothing of what the lion knows. Nothing of the chorus of touch sung in obedience to stellar logics. Orders more vast than these small circles confining us to the artless dance with hollow discipline, up and down, no joining. Thumbed from below, we bend at the knees in an ugly, soulless wobble. Under these reins, both Orpheus and Eurydice court elusive security, are locked in a bank vault for future study, do not hear the singing and produce no song. Remember to flout the two-straight path, to let the downpour inspire you, to hear the wisdom the buried voices are sprouting inside your ear. Those faces in the darkness are not an illusion. Sparagmos, he will rejoin Eurydice in pieces. The notes come free of the staff. The song scatters as it leaves from the branch. Yet these songs cannot be lost or depleted. Open your lyre to the sky and catch them. Rain-pelted, wind-whipped, or sun shining, it makes no difference. No millennial fears or eschatological dreams, for he did not let go or look, and she kept singing that he might know her as the joyful counterpoint to his mournful song. In the mirror of his hair, her cryptic smile betrays the memory of death. Or is it life? What difference? If these patterns we make along the walls resonate, if I reach my hand up and rip the silk from the skeleton of my umbrella, will my body fall out of time, become an instrument, uncitied? Will I wrap my arms around his neck and smell the earth of his animal warmth? The universe fills with music. No, that's not it. It is filled, always. Only now that she has returned, I can hear the singing clearly. I'm going to finish with a shorter poem that was the one that I gave to Dia to put on their advertisement for this reading, called The Longing for Something to Protect. The longing for something to protect eats us up with useless grief, binds the intestinal spool into a painful and inept clench against vigilante memory, the risk cop in our brain. Something to worry over under our noses, in the way. Something we keep beside us that cannot survive on its own. Something to go home for and begrudge a little. A gentle but not binding limit on this supposedly commodious freedom. We check email like addicts. Something to direct the directionless heart and pressure time's cottony mass into something other than a list of tasks. The work will never be done. Something we cannot pay to ensure, but without which we cannot live. Something that will be, though we can't see it, indispensable to love's psyche. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to introduce Tony Towle. Tony Towle was born in Manhattan on June 13th, 1939, and grew up in Queens and Westchester. He heard Kenneth Koch and Frank OHara read their poetry on successive weeks at the New School in 1962 and took the workshops they gave there the following year. He received the Gotham Book Mart Avant-Garde Poetry Prize in 1963, and his first full-scale collection, North, won the Frank OHara Award for 1970. Towle is the author of, among other books, Lines for the New Year, Autobiography and Other Poems, The History of the Invitation, New and Selected Poems, and Winter Journey, published by Hanging Loose Press in 2008. He is also the author of Memoir 1960 to 1963, published by Faux Press in 2001. In Fugitive Visions, the last poem in his masterful The History of the Invitation, New and Selected Poems, Tony Towle writes, quote, "For some can sing the loves of Romeo and Juliet and so forth, while I merely amplify the stammering of adolescence." Eschewing both the fragmentary, more modernist style of John Ashbery's poems in The Tennis Court Oath and the experimental personality play of OHara's work, Towle writes poetry in complete sentences whose dry humor evinces a wide knowledge of literary culture. Many of Towle's poems involve arcane references and invented dialogue, but he is also capable of love poems of a lyric abstraction whose heartbreaking matter-of-factness derives from his ability to insert the poetic into the mundane. In After Dinner, We Take a Drive into the Night, an early poem, he writes, "I begin to feel passion. I walk back and forth, and it is a slow movie, without the interest of acting, only walking. Far from my prying eyes, she strips off her clothes. Oh, for the wings of a bird." There are many voices in Towle's poetry, including one he refers to as Towle-esque. But riding over all of them, in control, is this hip, cool, extremely erudite, but paradoxically unassuming personality. Having learned intimately from that master of wit, Kenneth Koch, Towle knows the value and valence of humor in poetry, and crucially, how not to go too far. Towle seems to belong to a more sophisticated, elegant mode of writing, or universe. Maybe it is the case that he has more in common with his immediate predecessors in the New York school than with such contemporaries as Ted Berrigan, Ron Padgett, Jim Brody, and Dick Gallup. There is little of the Beat or Black Mountain propensity to deal with life on its own terms in Towle's poems. Rather, he substitutes the terms of the poem, which he endlessly tweaks, prodding its material, stimulating himself, seemingly, with insights and entertainments born of the writing process. In this, he does share something with Padgett, but his true coevals are the poets Charles North, Paul Violi, and Frank Lima. With North, Towle shares a precise valuing of word weight and line rhythm. With Violi, the vast imagination, delighted at its ability to surpass its bounds. And with Lima, the knowledge that the poem will arrive at its existence by the rhythmic flooding of one word after the next. In fact, it is Towle's musicality that gives his poetry its undeniable, though difficult to parse, appeal. Romanticism is the proof of the pudding, and the rest will take care of itself. Please welcome Tony Towle.
Could you hear that? Good. All right. Glad to read with Jennifer, whose work I've just begun to discover and like very much. And Vincent, who from 1963 was always Alex and Ada's very young son. And then one day I ran into Ada on West Broadway, and she said, "Oh, in school Vincent wrote a little essay about one of your poems and one of Frank's poems." I said, "Oh, that's nice." I said, "How old is Vincent?" 17 or 18, whatever it was. I said, "Oh, other people's children don't get as old as fast as your own, as we all know who have them." And now he's introducing me. Just, life is extraordinary. Let's see if I need my glasses or it'll be counterproductive. No. Bagatelle. Clouds have again seized control of the weekend, and Teshub, storm god of the Hittites, Toshiba, according to the spellcheck, casually mentions in a moistened Aramaic, which is odd because it is not his first language, nor, as you might suppose, is it mine, that we're really in for at this time, that liquidity will be a daily fact of life for the rest of the year, which means, he explains, that in addition to the endless rain, cosmic investors could turn our world in to make a profit at the planetary exchange, or more likely to cut a loss. Since I've already removed the helmet of judgment, I will check on the proceedings in Orange County, where Tony Towle is suing David M. Renault et al. For automotive negligence. It seems that Dave and those other bastards out there tried to run down the last persona I can afford to maintain in Southern California, my liquidity being what it is. Not that he ever supplies any interesting imagery, just sits on the beach all day and stares at the ocean in a vast impression of liquidity. A Mr. Hulot's holiday without the verbosity, which is exactly the kind of reference that sails right over his head and plunks into the Pacific, and that he thinks must have been a fish. By now I'm on a trip, if not exactly a vacation, though I anticipate brambles, mosquitoes, poisonous berries, and lunatics with shotguns, as I usually encountered on vacation, except when I would sit on the beach and consider the great North Atlantic, investing the feeling that vacations would last longer than I knew they were going to. But it seems Teshub, as is the way with storm gods, was hyperbolizing, for the rain has finally stopped. Apollo has opened another referential window and is beginning to apply sunlight to the moisture. Have a swell apotheosis, Teshub tells me. And, startled before I can manage a thanks, you too, we are parted by the clearing air. Ethos. Vous êtes un de ces types protestants qui se trouvent seulement à Genève. You are one of those Protestant types one finds only in Geneva. I heard an older man saying lasciviously to a young one at the Cedar Bar a very long time ago, in clear textbook French, and I was startled, apprehensive for a second that it had been directed at me, though I have never been to Geneva. And I don't think that's what Calvin had in mind when he went to Geneva. He went to create an ethos, through which, as a distant subtextual consequence, I find myself engaged in marginally necessary yard work, somewhere between Olive Bridge and Crumville, to justify midnight sensuality later on, in the waters of the enchanted spring, with Diane, the woodland nymph who conveyed me here from the metropolis by means of a spirited white Toyota. But work for reward is not what Calvin meant either, really. Yet it is out of his control, isn't it? For that's what happens to an ethos. It dapples the landscape like invisible confetti from a distant century, falling unobserved as one rakes the leaves, gathers the kindling. As many of you know, Joe Lasser, Frank O'Hara's roommate for many years, wrote a book called Digressions on some poems of Frank O'Hara, which, since Joe ended up hating just about everybody, I think the editors took some liberty with. Anyway, it's called Digression. I can't tell what I know they took out, which I heard by chance. This actually is a poem that embeds a story that he told me that I thought he should have put in, but he must have forgotten. Digression 51003 for Joe Lasser. Listening to Samuel Barber's orchestrated souvenirs of whatever it was he was remembering, with the Mets on the tube, with the sound off, would be an oxymoronic afternoon to some, even a gender preference tussle or manly brawl. but to others, me, a way of building up the entertainment quotient before adding actual activity to the mix. Perhaps editing for those who will give me money, or laboring over my own work when I'm the one who pays. And the Mets are like an orchestra in need of rehearsal, not like the ensemble playing Sam's exquisite miniature song for oboe, the most beautiful instrument, I think, even though I have never heard a 20th century piano concerto I didn't like, a coincidence of sensibility I shared with Frank, although mercifully neither one of us had to hear them all. And you left out a great story that you told me back in '64, which you said Frank didn't like to talk about, of how at the Living Theater reading 5 years before, which wasn't the Leroy Jones benefit, by the way, which was in '63, and I was there because Leroy was one of the readers in this one, with Alan and Ray Bremser. There's a famous voice photo of the three of them watching Frank read that Larry used in a lithograph, incorporating Frank's To a Young Poet about John Wieners. So Frank was reading that poem and others, and Kerouac was in the audience, drunk, and yelling, "Get off the stage, OHara, you faggot. I want to read some haiku." And after a few minutes of this, Frank actually started to leave, but the audience said, "No, don't go, don't listen to him," and so forth. But Kerouac wouldn't stop, and finally Frank, walking off, said, "No, that's all right, let him read. My silence is more interesting than his bullshit." Though delivered, as you told me, with tears in his eyes. Well, like the Mets, I'm coming up to bat in the bottom of the ninth, or maybe the eighth if I'm lucky, but far behind in the game, and the music seems to have stopped to listen. Always freeze my water in there. Yeah, freeze it. And your people didn't give me any water anyway, so I'm glad I brought it. I could have asked. The dinner party. Life is a reassuring dream that is vivid but comfortably mundane, said the schmuck aloud to himself as he sat down next to the schlemiel and indulged in an expansive gesture of certitude that sent the latter's soup into the lap of the adjacent schlemazel. The schmendrick apologized to no one in particular, and the schmagegi accepted, while the schlep scuffled off to the kitchen to get another bowl, and at the front door the schnorrer pushed past the schlumps to talk his way in. It was the Putz, of course, that had arranged the seating, which includes a decorous melange of schmoes crowded in next to the radiator, sweating and uncomfortable, but grateful to have been invited. I have no idea where I'm supposed to sit, so I leave and go sit in the park, where I hear an avian voice. "Hey, you don't recognize me? I'm the pigeon that craps on your windowsill. Why are you down here in the cold when you could be upstairs eating a free meal? What are you, some kind of schnook?" Which apparently was not a word from the old country, but American Jews in the Lower East Side made it up because I guess it sounded like all the other words. 1346 Redux. When I first dipped into Froissart's Chronicle of the Battle of Crécy, I eventually learned, the first major land engagement of the 100 Years' War, I was 9. And even through the wondrous panoply of imagined nightly warfare, was given pause when the mercenary Genoese crossbowmen were discomfited by the relentless showers of English arrows, fired from a range they could not match, their own bowstrings being wet from a momentary downpour, and having just marched 18 tiring miles to get there, and the French king was then so insensitive and precipitate as to order them immediately forward to soften up the English forces. Not only were they discomfited, but sorely vexed, for when they were unwise enough to attempt to retire out of range, the Count of Alençon, considering this maneuver unacceptable, declared them to be rascals and ordered mounted men-at-arms to critique their performance with variously shaped medieval tools, the arms, all of them designed to cause pain when applied with force. Even though these monitors were now getting first-hand experience of discomfiture themselves, as the English archers had neither the manners nor wit to distinguish between hirelings and their betters, so that the crossbowmen must have indulged in the most pungent colloquialisms available in the 14th century Genoese dialect, which I will attempt to approximate. Ouch, another of those discomfiting pointed missiles seems to be penetrating the protective garments meant to keep them out. Considering that, to say the least, these French are not sympathetic to our issues. In fact, are participating in diminishing our numbers to an alarming degree, and as employers are clearly impossible to please. Was taking on this assignment really the best use we could have made of our time and skill set? The subtext is understatement, I think. You heard that. Okay, good. HEB, among other things, is a prefix meaning 7. Spring. It started with serial wordplay. Hebe, a comely body revolving around the barroom like an asteroid, makes a momentary stop at the table, paradoxically reviving habitated senses with further libations. The more intellectually curious of the sodden hebdomad discussed what day of the week it might possibly be, until a habitudinous passerby actually tells them, and then, taking their bewilderment as an invitation, sits down with his beverage of choice to digress. A bee has 5 eyes, 1 large compound orb on each side of the head, and 3 primitive eyes on top to detect overhead luminosity. Somehow a beam of light shines from above into the hive, but I cannot detect it. Who am I? First drinker. The blood of a honeybee is never sweet, if that answers your question. Second drinker. The Romans used to feed this sweet raisin wine called something or other to sick bees so they'd get well. But you've just got to wonder if after a while the bees weren't malingering. Third drinker. We never drank with our bees, but it reminds me of when me and the missus, we'd have raspberry jello every night for dessert, except on Saturday when we'd have orange. Somehow we liked that one better. But those euphoric gelatinous days are gone now. Fourth drinker. Speaking of women, I always remember the one who should have felt more sorry for my long voyage and ensuing tribulations. So I would keep mentioning things, setting up a kind of nest at the base of the relationship, because I'm sure she was a goddess, the elusive minx. You should have seen the way she undulated, gleaming and distant in a nightgown of divinity against a transparent disk of alabaster clouds. Fifth drinker. The bite of a distant woman, my grandfather used to say, could be fatal. Fourth drinker. It was like being enclosed between transcendental commas and hearing incomprehensible whispers until I finally nudged the punctuation, but by the time I got to the end of the sentence, she was gone. Sixth drinker. It doesn't sound like you were in her breeding group. Seventh drinker. Speaking of futility, the biggest butterflies in the world are in Queen Alexandra's closet, and the door to it is in New Guinea. And I went all the way down there, but couldn't get it open. And when I came back, I found that their distant relatives had eaten holes in the clothes hanging in my own closet. So I think I learned a good lesson there. The colloquy was getting too bizarre, even for me, and seeing there would be no answer to the riddle, I left these dubious entities and their elementary characterization and took my beverage of choice to a nearby table, where I sat down and composed a sonnet. Spring. Early in the morning, raindrops on the aluminum dream, and then a replica of the lantern that had guided me across the platinum night, which included the cypress grove that had been my gift, and I wanted it back. But I have to go away now, for tigers and elephants need my help. And after they are helped, I will create a waterfall and rest beside it, and draw up a contract with the adjoining space, the silver drops of spray blurring its terms and conditions. But to work out an agreement with these successive vistas, we will need help from a circumference of clarity and a marvelous pencil to record what is happening. The lake still needs help. It is far from the actual water. And this is characteristic of the sort of designer who disappears among the cypresses, asking the very mildness of the atmosphere for help. I've always been fascinated by epigraphs, so I went looking for some in my imagination. It's called Dependable Epigraphs, and it has an epigraph from Virgil. My epigraphs will prepare you for the excursion, but not for the ruts in the road. Stay well ahead of your turnips in the garden of life. Michel de Montaigne. Never parade your ignorance. A discreet amble down a side street will suffice. Benjamin Disraeli. Don't swat flies close to the ear of God. St. Francis of Assisi. Metaphors are the unstable companions of an already impractical fellow. Henry Ford. Those who are not willing to subvert the law do not have sufficient stake in the outcome of events. Niccolo Machiavelli. If patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel, religion is certainly the first. Voltaire. Everywhere I go, I find a poet has already been there neurotically before me. Sigmund Freud. He actually said that. Socializing is networking to no purpose. Oscar Wilde. Politics is the art of preventing people from taking part in affairs which properly concern them. Paul Valéry, as quoted in the original French at a press conference by George W. Bush. Farewell, O insatiable biographers of the future. William Shakespeare. Pimp my soporific and annoying orchestral arrangements, bitch. Lawrence Welk. The peasant's place is in the hovel. Harry and Leona Helmsley. The woman's place is in the novel. Henry James. Never let Henry James have the last word. Edith Wharton. You've got to know when to stop. Leo Tolstoy. The Valéry quote was real, too, except I don't think George Bush said it in the original French. Unlikely. Semi-private. If you're dressed in white and being importuned by sick people, you might be a nurse or other healthcare professional. If you feel you've been pierced with harpoons and are lying on a beach, listening to the sand and not hearing the ocean, you could be mistaken. But if, in the middle of the forest, you come upon your arch foe finishing a sandwich and drinking from your skull, you will know with certainty you have taken a wrong turn in life. Coming home from school that day, you should have gone left at the dry goods store, followed Elm Street to the edge of town, and then set off on the dash through the proliferations of the moment to the interim haven of the future. This must have been the work of the sorceress in red, whose existence may have come to fruition that very morning. You overheard whispers in the garden, there, just outside your window, while enchanted flies buzzed in the heat. So just 6 sonnets. I was going to say short sonnets, but they are what they are. They're long for haiku, but they're reasonable length for sonnets. Slipstream. If you still have charm, you have been underutilized. But tell us, which do you love more, your dagger or the moon? Now withdraw the question and the dagger both from the eye of the beholder, and return to the symposium being held on a rock, somewhere in the sea. Do not allow the dark impending shapes to obscure the presentations completely, or take in the wisdom of the supervising mermaid. It is only the false penguin that will seek to count your fish rather than eat them. Pensées ondulantes. I thought undulating thoughts would be pretentious. For Donna Maria de Kreft. This New Jersey landscape would have appalled Vermeer, though he would have been inspired upon going indoors and put on canvas a wonderland of exotic furnishings we would have sworn were as real as the central figures, young ladies seated at a computer, or unkempt youth with handheld communication device, so that the overall results could be judged as awesome, even if not quite totally so. But I sense a transparent layer of sarcasm, akin to that with which the Parisians deftly coat their metropolis each morning to repel the corrosive stares of the gauche, an asperity that dissolves harmlessly by evening, evaporating idiomatically above the Seine. Cape Mental for Gillian McCain. The jonquils have pushed up through the floorboards. It is time to take the donkey from the house, which reveals another donkey, or even two, and I go to Mars to elude them, but only get halfway there. And halfway back, a bovine avatar appears from among the constellations, presenting a brimming goblet between silver hooves. And as a consequence, I meet the people of my dreams, who inquire if they are, in reality, who I think they are or who they think they are. Spoiling the mystery would mean the end of the code, I tell them, the final nail in the coffee. Instead, take refuge in our provisional association. We'll pick up the saga from there. The next poem is the one that occurs to me when, after ruffling strange feathers at the gathering and evading personified exigencies, bored technicians, and commonplace dialogue, I step out between the emerald and the lime, between the sun and the shade, turn on my inner browser and sit down on the lawn to relax in ambiguation. The screams of the patients correspond to the notes of the viola da gamba, and the dexterous reassurance of the doctors follows the contrapuntal path of the harpsichord, all the way down to the surface of the koi pond, where it is nibbled into silence by pairs of busy miniature lips. Too much information. While we are sitting down to lunch, I observe that poetry saved my life in 1960 and might be doing so again at this very moment, even though I wasn't actually writing. While that is being digested, I add that although my official name is Anthony, the intent was for it to be Tony, but Tony wasn't considered a real name, which caused problems of identity and authority ever after. But on to another subject. In Torrid Zone, with James Cagney and Anne Sheridan, Rosario, Cagney's wicked adversary, Cooley splits an infinitive in mid-film, the same verb that Cagney had voiced correctly half a minute before. Thus, Rosario mocks both the hero and English grammar, while he stirs up unrest among the workers, whom, in an admitted faux pas, I have invited to join us here for lunch. The olden days. A couple of shots of breakfast bourbon create an inspiring tantrum on the palate, which is transferred to the typewriter somehow for minutes of gloriously diluted output, as if a door in the eternal clouds had been left ajar and one walked through it, willing to take the fall. I wake up at the low end of the cityscape market and thought of calling on you, you who are yet inscribed in code. And please consider that I must find you at the obscure end of the impression spectrum, where the envelope has never been opened in such false awakening, or through curious lassitude, or by common sense. I'll close with a poem called 7-0, and in parenthesis, toasts. To the long stretches of time of paying little attention to what might be going wrong inside, farewell. And here's to the restoration of cause and its ratio to irascibility, to something more than absolute zero. As for the growing assemblage of pills, I take heart in the words of the Earl of Rochester to Charles II. I mean, really, sire, if we couldn't wash down our atenolol and Coumadin with a decent Chateauneuf du Pape, what the devil would be the point of going on? And although I don't have to answer that question just yet, there are many more things I could drink to that my capacity these days can support. So we'll take a break with some mental acuity exercise. Can you find the Prussian General Staff of 1870 in this waterfall, for example? Or discern Stalin's intentions toward the kulaks in the rose bush in the foreground? Note the charming antique armoire and spiced pine sinking slowly into the marsh. Without your glasses, determine on which still visible drawer the grain is closest to the topographic map of the state in which you were born. Finally, before we move on, see if you can locate the golf ball, a Titleist 1 with a nick in it, hit 50 years ago that ended up in the pond. It made a sploosh, by the way, and thus ended its wayward journey with a digraph. Golf Balls in the Pond is an elevating album of verse about personal loss that I no longer have time enough to read, or to write either. I wonder what percentage of my life has been spent trying to be funny and ending up otherwise. The number is somewhere in the waterfall, and here's to keeping it ambiguous enough for the universe to suspend my fate until it shakes the dust from a billion suns, at least. Thank you.